Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show Crosstalk. And today we are fortunate to have with us one of the outstanding young pollsters of America today, somebody who can claim that he pretty much got most of the recent elections right, maybe all of the recent elections right, unlike the big name pollsters, and I mean, of course, Richard Baris. So welcome, Richard. It's very good to have you here. And perhaps if we just start off with just saying something briefly about yourself and about your work and what makes your polling distinct from the polling of others.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me here. I watch your show, love the show. It's good. It's good stuff. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah, first and foremost, I mean, you said it. I'm a pollster. We do a lot more than political research. But basically, you know, in this industry, we have some problems, and they're problems that most people do recognize. But sadly, in the media space, where it's about political polling, it doesn't seem that they have very much of an incentive to try to fix those issues or address them appropriately, because it's a groupthink. It's a hive mind. This is a dominated left-wing industry, and they want a certain outcome. Right. And I think ultimately, guys, without getting into the weeds, to put it as simple as I can, polling, like other social sciences, if you want to call it a science, is about predicting human behavior. And any attempt to do that is always difficult. But it's hard to predict the behavior of people that you no longer understand and you may even despise. So it's very hard to inform others about what you think the actions of other people are going to be if you have no connection to them whatsoever. And I think what we've seen is the polling industry is very much like the rest of the media, gone in one direction, and the country has gone in another, and we're in a unique environment where giving your views is actually dangerous sometimes. So it makes it even more difficult.
When you were saying that they actually despise the people they're studying, but the people that are being studied know that. They know that they're despised by these people.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And now, we acknowledge that, and that actually goes into our pitches. So we have prompts, however we reach people, whether it's by phone or by online. We have to be not sympathetic, but conscientious toward that. And we have to actually alert them to this. This is the period we're in now. We understand not everybody appreciates polling or wants to participate in polling, but listen, your participation is vital. It's vital. Give us a couple of minutes. I mean, this is the way we've had to approach people lately, because it's not just getting people to respond, getting them to respond accurately, keeping them during the interview. They like to drop out, especially certain groups of voters. They don't like long surveys. It's just the challenges are starting to pile up. There's without a doubt.
So how would you characterize it? What makes your polling distinct from the big name, like the ABC News polling and the all of the Washington Post polling? I mean, what makes you different from the big name pollsters?
I could probably spend an hour just talking about that, right? But I'll try to simplify it into a few at least. One, incentive. So first and foremost, I have an incentive to be as accurate as possible. I don't have the media's backing. My support is public. So viewers, followers, they fund this. They want me to get it right. I think part of the business model over here is that people, or we hope, and I think we're right, people appreciate you being honest, even if it's not the result they were hoping for. And if they trust you to do at least the best job you can, then they'll reward you for that. And they'll come back even. Our community, our online community, is very different than what you see on Twitter these days, which is they're looking for affirmation polling. They want a poll to tell them what they hope or what they think is going on. and they don't appreciate anybody else's point of view, and in fact demonize them now. So if you have a different take on the election, they come at you, well, the knives come out and they come at you. That's not the way it is surrounding what we do. And I think that's a big part of it. Incentive is a big deal. We've polled for media outlets before. We polled for the Epoch Times last year. Our experience was very different. Again, really going to incentive. They came to me and I'm not someone who likes to poll for media. Everybody and knows that in the industry. And they came to me and asked, and I was skeptical. But they said the magic words, which were, we're going to just tell you what we think our readers want to hear about as far as the issues, as far as polling, the race itself, just be as accurate as possible. So and when they said that, I was on board. But that's not the way it is in the industry today. Sadly, it's not. I'm not in the newsrooms with everybody else. I can just tell you what other colleagues have told me. The pressure is different than it used to be years ago. Years ago, the pressure was be accurate, be accurate. Now the pressure is give us a horse race. So it's not getting aside from some of the ideological corruption that's involved with other methods. I think that it really is that the media model itself is not very conducive to accurate polling. They want a horse race, they want it soon. Whereas, one of the more well-known examples is in Wisconsin, which goes into why another reason why we're different. We reach people through different modes. We understand different groups of people respond to different modes at different rates. And some respond not at all to certain modes. And what I mean by that is phone, whether it's a live call or an electronic interview, an IVR, interactive voice response, or maybe you text them on their cell phone, or you email them and request that they participate in a panel. Everybody responds at different rates depending on who they are. And we recognize that and we know that. And one of the more common examples why the horse race element is bad, in Wisconsin, it's a very difficult state to poll. Before the election, I just kept telling people, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Everybody still wants to pretend randomization works, guys. It doesn't work because too few people take these surveys. Now it's about reaching representation. You need larger samples, and you need to that's one part of it. And you really need to make sure that you have spoken with enough people from different groups in the electorate to know that they're represented correctly in the poll. And the only way to do that is to properly map out the electorate. You have to know who's going to come out to vote. And a lot of pollsters shirk that responsibility now. NBC News, they didn't even move to a likely voter model this past year, which is, again, you can question that on an ethical level because that's part of a pollster's job. What pollster would agree to that? You can't give a registered voter population and Pontius Pilate it and say, my hands are clean. You have to. That's part of your job, is to predict who's going to come out to vote. So I could say that we could talk about this for forever, but I think those are a few major reasons, along with the fact that we recognize that this industry has methodological problems, has had them for years. Veterans in the industry, whether they're exit pollsters or snap pollsters, they know it. We all know it. They just don't. Some acknowledge it, some don't. And now we're to the point of an ethical problem because those problems are there. They refuse to acknowledge them. And in fact, if you look at the APOR report, guys, that's another whitewash. So APOR is the American Association of Public Opinion Research. Their report this year said, yep, we were wrong. We were the most wrong in 40 years. By the way, it's Donald Trump's fault. I mean,
That's right.
This is crazy.
We did a podcast on that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know the Travala Group guys, okay?
Robert, absolutely. Yep.
What do you think of those guys? Because again, let's be brutally honest here. I mean, they made a lot of appearances on Fox. I didn't see them elsewhere here. I don't know what their politics are, but Fox liked them and they liked Fox, okay? But their road record seemed a lot better, okay? I mean, do you have any insight there? I mean, do they have different kind of modeling, or is it their approach to the potential respondents, the voters, different?
Yeah, I do have a little bit of insight just from the comments that I've heard Robert make, and we all know the language, so when I see him on Hannity or another show when he's trying on Fox, because he did make a lot of Fox hits, trying to explain what he does differently. I think a little bit, there's some overlap there. Big deal with Robert is that he acknowledges that there are some people who simply are not going to take 40 questionnaire surveys. And he's right about that. There are just some people, they don't have the time. They don't have the time. And if you do that, you're going to result in higher interest voters and voters who are, this is something that we've been studying, voters who are just simply more comfortable during surveys. We've actually been measuring that since before the election. And because I thought there was so much value in it, we've continued in the months since. And he's on to something there, and I don't want to jump the gun. But I think we've discovered something that's pretty important about the groups of people who tell us they're uncomfortable. There's a very large, a very strong relationship between them, those who lie, or those who refuse to tell you their opinion. So that alone can account for quite a bit in a sampling era. So there's also, he's different on how he reaches voters, and he will not reach out. This is, I guess we share this as well. There is really no point to talk to adults when you're polling an election. All adults don't vote. 20, 30, 40 years ago and more, there wasn't that large of a disparity between the adult population and the voting electorate. And now there is quite a bit. So I know he does stick to likely voters. He tries to stick to likely voters, as do we. But, I think, I don't have any specific insight outside of what I've heard him, publicly comment about. But
it's something you said I think is really interesting. Is there, as far as political preferences, I mean, is it more likely that someone that would take the time to answer 40 questions vote left as opposed to right?
And there is, and that wasn't. It's not that it wasn't always the case. It's that disparity now has grown much larger. So what does that mean when you're in the field trying to poll? Go back and look at all of the polls from 2020 and before, but it was most prevalent in 2020. You could see these rural margins. Maybe the Democrat was doing overwhelming in urban areas. We all heard about the suburban voter. And then maybe the margin was something like 55-35 in rural America. But on election day, of course, that didn't turn out to be the case. We were doing 65, 70s plus. We may understand why that is now. So even in our rural samples, and most pollsters would simply weight, rural respondents to their appropriate share of the electorate. But what we are finding is, even in rural America, it isn't good enough to simply say, I spoke to 250 people in rural America. That should be enough for this poll, for this sample size. They're weighted appropriately, move on. What we're finding is that, and the New York Times polling is a perfect example. When you first pick up the phone and you get in the field, you'll reach that librarian in Greene County, Pennsylvania, before anybody. And she's dying to tell you how much she's going to vote for Joe Biden and she hates Donald Trump. Who you will not reach is the steelworker or, even working class women. They just don't seem, and when you do, they don't want to give you their answer right away. You may have to circle back and try to reach them in a couple of weeks again to kind of nudge them, without giving some secret sauce. The very, very basic, end of this is that, liberals are more likely to want to give you their opinion than conservatives, and that disparity is growing.
So, is it the case that with most of the well-known pollsters, the ABC News, the Washington Post, and so on, are they consciously oversampling Democrats? Do they know that they're oversampling Democrats, or is this just simply inadvertent?
Yeah, and they let that kind of, by the way, that oversampling debate, they let that go, I think, because it kind of helps cover their tracks. But it's all right to oversample somebody. The problem is when you overrepresent them in the polls. So we always oversample Hispanics in Florida because they're so diverse, for instance, but then we make sure that their overall share of the electorate is an appropriate share of the electorate. And I think at this point, guys, the answer to that is, 4 years ago, even after 2016, part of me would have told you, everyone at their core, we all know everybody leans left, but at their core, they're trying to do the best job they can. It's a difficult job. It's hard in this day and age. It has always been hard, but it's harder in this day and age. Now I am a complete cynic, and I've converted to cynicism because it's worse than I thought it would be. I thought eventually we would reach a level where we'd be able to have a professional discussion like adults. You did this wrong. Here's why. Maybe you can tell me, give me some. I mean, in the private sector, when we're not so consumed about politics, that's what we do as survey researchers. When we're talking about branding or whatever it may be, and we share our experiences. In politics, that's gone. And it's smear your enemies, smear those who dissent, without, without a credible reason to do so. And now
when we get the polls coming up to the election, my sense is now, and this is from 2016 to the present, is that they're giving poll data to discourage people to vote. It's over. Yeah. Why go out? Why go out? He's done. Yep. He's toast. I mean, because it seems to me that if you have this liberal mindset, you already have a negative attitude towards your sample pool of people. I mean, it's just weird kind of Faustian willing something on, because that's what we keep seeing, why vote? You've already lost, which is not the case.
So I think that's right. It is a way of depressing the vote, but even more important, it's depressing the funders, because if they think, hey, this
that's right.
Toast, why throw good money after bad? So it has a real agenda behind it when you put out these polls.
I was going to point to that as well. We do tend to focus on the impact, on the public, but fundraising. I mean, what do they do when the new Fox poll comes out? When the new ABC Langer research poll has Biden ahead by 17 in Wisconsin, what happens? A fundraiser goes out, and then maybe Trump's donors say, I don't know if I should bother giving him the money this week. It doesn't look good. So that without a doubt, I think what we're seeing is the two problems that people like me have been yelling about: response bias and a social desirability bias. The response bias being what we were just talking about, and a social desirability bias being that people are afraid to tell you the truth. We do know now respondents who told us they were going to vote for Joe Biden, who in fact we know did not. There's just no way. We know that not that we went back and checked their ballot, but we now have results, actual voting results. So it's impossible that certain people in those groups weren't lying to us. And we know that now. But yeah, I was going to point that fundraising out because it matters. And I think at this point, guys, they're using those two methodological issues to mask ethical issues. So now that's where I am in the post-2020 world. So it used to be, actually, leading up to it, I was getting there too, because 18, the polls were not good either. We tend to glance over them. And it was this rush by Harry Enton at CNN, for instance, and Nate Cohen at the New York Times. See, we polled the House correctly, so we're good. Let's move on and into 2020. And the fact is, they didn't poll the House correctly. They overestimated Democratic support by anywhere between 6 and 8 points, depending on most of the big pollsters. And in the district level, polling is always difficult, so I won't hold them, to that high of a standard. Congressional district polling is very difficult, and always has been, and it's been notorious for it. I don't know why we went into it pretending like somebody, could accurately do this for the first time in their life. But definitely at the state level, those Senate polls, the gubernatorial polls, they were horrible. Richard Cordray did not beat Mike DeWine in Ohio. Richard Cordray was leading him in all but one summer poll by NBC Marist going into that race in Ohio. Ron DeSantis, as we know, is the very popular governor of Florida right now. Andrew Gillum did not beat him by 12 points like CNN claimed would happen a week before the election. So, and I could go on and on. Fox News, Claire McCaskill did not hold her seat in Missouri. In Indiana, Joe Donnelly is no longer the Democratic incumbent. He was beaten soundly by Mike Braun. That was a 13-point miss. And we just glanced over all of that because Democrats retook the House. The media narrative was that Democrats were going to take the House back. And we just kind of brushed, swept it under the rug. And my argument going into 2020 was a presidential election is not a national election. It's a state by state by state, and in some cases, like Maine and others, it's by congressional district. If you couldn't poll the midterm elections correctly on these levels, then we have a serious problem going into 2020 as a matter of trust and just as a matter of being accurate in what we report. They didn't care. They moved on. Others, people like me and others, we wrote our articles, we wrote our columns. It got ignored, even mocked, and here we are. Again,
well, you brought up the word ethics. Okay. What do you think of Frank Luntz?
Frank Luntz should be a pariah. He should be shunned from this industry. He's a corporate shill. Look, some people I won't go at, I try to extend a level of professionalism to. He's not one of them. He pushes, Frank Luntz is a fraud. He pushes his corporate clients' views as legitimate research onto the public. So Frank Luntz had a huge hand in telling the Midwest, for those of you in Michigan, Pennsylvania listening, that Purdue Pharma's new wonder drug OxyContin was not addictive. Frank Luntz turned into a medical expert and went around the country pushing those views onto the public. Sadly, we all know how that worked out. I have myriad examples, guys, for.
Before I moved to Russia, I was living in Poland, and actually I worked for Colgate-Palmolive, and I did consumer research, and I learned how to write the questionnaires, focus groups, one-on-ones. It was amazing education for me. And now when I look at questionnaires, I can see the bias built in, because you can get whatever answer you want. It's not hard, okay? It's hard to write a good questionnaire, though. It's really hard to write a good questionnaire. And the reason why I brought up Frank Luntz is that two people that apparently worked with him said that his focus group stuff was just BS. It was just, he just made up the results.
Turn those dials, right? You're absolutely right. The difficult part is building a questionnaire that isn't tainted and isn't by. We see this all the time, and not to call others out either. I'm not, I never try to pick a fight, but you pointed out where you see it. YouGov is notorious for this. Their questionnaires are designed in a way that a second year undergrad would flunk. I mean, if they try to put that across as their project, it would flunk. You can't, for instance, during the Trump era, Donald Trump said this horrible on Twitter. Do you approve or disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing as president? You cannot do that. In fact, you can't even bring up Twitter because it's a source of such controversy, his use of Twitter. The approval question, ballot questions, all must come first. And then if you're being honest with the individual taking the survey, you say, now we want to test positive or negative messaging that we're hearing about, whether it's in national media or political parties are trying to push. We want your honest opinion about them. So, first up, Donald Trump does this on Twitter. He says, because he's trying to get around the media says it's inappropriate. Which do you think? I mean, that would be the correct way to lay that out, but that's not what we see. And it's sad because it's becoming a norm now.
Right. It's particularly the case when you're trying to generate support for a war. So just like before the Iraq War, you say the intelligence believes that Saddam Hussein was behind the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Do you think it's right for the United States then to attack Iraq? So people say, yeah, that sounds about right. But if you were just to ask them, do you think it's right for the United States to invade Iraq? People say, no, I don't think it's a good idea. So all you have to do is you put in this little preface and say, well, that seems to be what the intelligence assessment is. Do you think the United States should retaliate? Well, yeah, that sounds right. So absolutely, how you formulate the question, you get the result that you want.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that is why, I mean, people ask me all the time, well, where do we go from here? Now, I do still believe in the old George Gallup way of thinking that, polling is incredibly important for lawmakers, policymakers, elected officials to know where the public stands on issues, and they have to accurately be able to gauge that. Because if you cannot poll an election, then you have no business polling public opinion about an issue. If you're not accurate about an election, then why on earth would you think we care what you have to say about support for impeachment or gun laws, whatever it may be? The only test of a pollster's accuracy is election day. So it's very important. The only place I think we can go is, you were talking about the prompts. I mean, it can be all in the prompts. Voters should see that. They should, the consumer, a news consumer should see that. And that's what we're trying to do, really give people a level of transparency that, you're never going to beat them in the narrative war. I don't really think you can do that because they just have an endless supply of BS and money. But what you can do is make them look shady. You can basically put up two contrasting ways to do something, why don't you give what the People's Pundit gives? How come I don't know where these respondents are that you spoke to? He puts up these cool maps. You can hover over the little dot. It'll tell you everything. He spoke to him by phone. He spoke to him online. This is what the questionnaire looked like word for word, not just the questions. And I see that too a lot, which is they give you the questionnaire, but folks, that's not how it practically works in an interview. Somebody is talking between these questions. What is being said between question 5 and 6? What did the interviewer, what was he prompted to tell the respondent before he laid out this question? There is always something in between those questions. Why don't we know that?
They're probably saying, that man in the White House.
Right. Exactly. And we've seen this. We've heard it. My wife, Hispanic by descent, and very well, I'll just say it was heart research. I'd called. And first of all, it's supposed to be a random survey. I picked up the phone, but they wanted my wife. Why? Because I'm at the time, a 30-something-year-old, late 30s white man. And you want to speak to a female, a Hispanic female. Why on earth did you ask for her by name? But I digress. Going through the interview, the social bias was terrible. And the call centers with supposed gold standard live caller interviews, that's a joke. They are not the gold standard anymore. They're the pewter standard. They're the most inaccurate way that we collected responses last cycle. But in any event, that's a major problem with the with the industry itself. They're trying to dumb down cost, and at the same time, whether it's at a university or an outsourced call center, these people are not told or taught really how to correctly conduct an interview. And my wife was basically berated with shame because she did. I don't think she'd care if I told you. She chose Donald Trump. To her saying that, another clearly Hispanic woman, she was an interviewer, she had an Hispanic accent, was, oh, okay. What? Moving on to question 10. We don't need your sound effects after every question. That's crazy. And now I don't even trust to know. I don't even trust that you would even record the answer correctly if you're conducting an interview that badly.
To Colgate-Palmolive's defense, I can remember I helped organize focus groups, but I was never allowed to ask the questions because it was in Polish and I had an accent. And they said, people might feel uncomfortable. They're not understanding why you're talking about toothbrushes and this American here. It's very weird theatrics. It was nothing against me personally. I wrote the questionnaire. I just would sit in the control room and I would just watch. Okay. When it comes to making money, they take it very seriously. Okay.
That's right.
Pay a lot of money for it and they want good results. One of the things George and I do, and when the new polls come out, and I want your professional opinion about our unprofessional way of characterizing. So Joe Biden's got 50% job approval, and George and I instantly say, 45 max, okay? Because of what we've been seeing. We built into an algorithm into our minds that, depending on the issue, it's either 5 or 10%. And we feel good about that because of what's happened over the last 2 cycles.
Yeah, I think honestly, this is where I stand on a Biden's approval rating. He really didn't have a mandate, without getting into, the sensitive nature of it. He's the least credible president in our lifetime. He was the weakest candidate who supposedly defeated one of the strongest incumbents. So that I'm at the point now where the cynic in me says, they have no choice. He has no political capital. He has no mandate. He definitely doesn't. He didn't win super majorities like Obama in Congress. I mean, it clearly wasn't a strong victory. So what can we do? Let's rely on that social and response bias that we all know exists. Let's rely on that to just put out garbage polling because that'll help make things look a little better. I mean, that's where I'm at. That's how cynical I am now. We have been polling Biden since before the election. He never reached 50% favorable, which typically is how you can translate in a little bit higher approval later. People liked Barack Obama, even though they didn't like his policy. In order to get to 60 or more, or, it is incredibly difficult in the United States of America, in modern America, to get crossover support that high from the opposite party. You really have to be a transcending figure. So Barack Obama, the first Black president, very likable. You want him to succeed. So when the pollster calls, you know what? I don't agree with him on everything, but this is a moment for our country. And you know what? I hope he does all right. I somewhat approve, or I strongly approve. I'm happy to be an American today. That is not Joe Biden, folks. Joe Biden is what we called the great unremarkable. I mean, people just had no opinion about him whatsoever. They thought he was unremarkable, to say the least. Even his own supporters, nobody enthusiastically supported this guy. Moving into when he actually put his hand on the Bible, he started with us at 48%. That's it. And during COVID, the rollout of the vaccine, we did see him tick up into the mid 50s because of the vaccine rollout. But we told everybody at that time, he's going to collapse, and collapse quickly when that's no longer a big issue. So COVID, they have to keep around forever because on everything else, he's grossly unpopular. Immigration, the economy, foreign policy, US-China relations, we ask about all these. He's underwater and has been at least once on these issues. Except for the economy, he was above water a couple of points once. And now he's back underwater again.
Can we flip it though? Because one of the things that I've been thinking about, I agree with everything you just said. However, there's a very interesting caveat, and it's much to his advantage. It's difficult to dislike him. He does have that going for him. Is particularly, and George thinks there's something more to it than I do, is that, when you like his town hall, I mean, you felt embarrassed. You felt embarrassed for him. I think, people like us, I don't like to punch down. I mean, I'll punch up any day of the week, but, he's just an old man. Okay. So it's difficult to dislike. It's difficult to like him, but it's equally difficult to dislike him. Does that make any sense to you?
It does. I think you make a really good point. I try to explain this in a different way to people a lot, which is you look at his mental faculties, whatever it may be, and you mock it. People on the right, and many, not everyone, but I warn them that sometimes that can work in someone's favor. So now you're making him appear to be a weakling. And I'm not saying he's not. I mean, I have my own views, of course, like anybody else, but I'm looking at this objectively. You're making him appear to be weak. He's just an old man. He's like everyone's grandfather. So you're almost making, to some people, you're giving them a defensive reaction. So, don't mock an elderly man, right? Whatever it may be. And I'm not even saying I'm not guilty of this sometimes, because sometimes I watch him and I think, my God, this is a rudderless ship, but I get where so I understand that. I'm just saying there is credibility to the argument you're making. You know, with somebody who's competent and strong, like, maybe Obama wasn't manly like Trump was manly, but he still was competent and assertive.
He was competent.
But do
Yes.
you think, but
So,
yeah,
yeah.
But do you think, say, going back to the 2020 election, I mean, why did he get the nomination? I mean, we talked about this many times with Peter, where Obama basically intervened in the election because they were convinced that no one else other than Biden could defeat Trump. And so that's why they decided, they pushed everyone aside. They never thought that Harris or Beto or any of the others could beat Trump. And I think that's why they pushed everyone aside. I mean, do you think that was correct, that basically Biden was the only one who could be seriously competitive with Trump in that field last year?
Well, I think their line of thinking was correct. I don't. I think that Bernie Sanders would have made he would have put up a fight in states where Biden could not have. And barring the COVID changes, I think Biden was probably one of the weakest candidates. So what I mean by that, and I'm trying to, dance here a little, but if this was a normal election, normal meaning pre-COVID, Joe Biden would have gotten trounced. It would not even have been close, folks. We'd have been done at 11 o'clock at night. All right, let me just put it that way.
George and I were saying that in January. We were saying this, except for a unforetold event, this is a quick cakewalk, and an event happened here. I have another question for you, and if you use the question, just keep George and I in mind. Could you somehow, in a questionnaire or a one-on-one interview, without being condescending or showing your hand, I mean, a question like, who do you think is running the country? Because that kind of goes around, because I don't want, like Sean Hannity with sippy cup and all that. I find that abhorrent, and he stopped doing it. He stopped doing it because it's cruel, it's mean. Okay. So, I mean, I think he was probably told to do that, but I mean, I think all of us really would like to know. You said rudderless. Yeah, but who is running the ship? Okay. I think that's something that we would like to know. Is there a way as a pollster to get at that without showing your hand?
We've put a lot of thought to this. We haven't come up with something that satisfies me yet, honestly, because it's very difficult. Before the election, it was a matter of the campaign. We asked people whether or not they were comfortable with Kamala Harris if Joe Biden was not capable. And that we asked that very differently. Joe Biden at that time, 77, would be the oldest person ever to take the oath of office, to serve out, his term. If he was incapable of finishing his first term as in the office of the presidency, how comfortable or uncomfortable would you be with Kamala Harris finishing that term? And we were doing that to gauge her strength as a down ticket, as a number two on the ticket. It was very weak. And then what we did find was that people were more willing to be honest about that than they were to tell us if they believed Joe Biden had a mental problem. It was very interesting.
It's very, and now that you mentioned Kamala Harris, I mean, again, I don't want to go into the weeds or, generate a false narrative here, but it seems to me that there is a kind of a movement to we need to reassess the Harris situation here. And this is from the left, okay? This is from the left, okay? And it seems to me, I was just reading a few articles remarkably this morning, it seems to have kind of come to a climax. All of a sudden there's all these polls about Kamala Harris, like out of the blue, everybody's asking the same questions here. I mean, again, I'm not looking to create generate a narrative here. However, it shows the power and the misuse of power of polling agencies. Okay, because once they get they have the target on their mark, you know, let the pollsters do it for us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think pollsters are too willing to do that. We're a little bit more consistent with Kamala Harris. And we told people, you know, from polling the Democratic primary onto the general election, I think gave us a little bit more credibility, which is that this was never a popular woman. She never was somebody America looked at and said, you know what, I'm in love with Kamala Harris. They have always looked at her negatively. And moving into the election, you know, she had tepid at best. After the election, she came up to that. There's a honeymoon period, especially when you have media lavishing praise on you and everyone lavishing praise on you. But still, that got her to maybe 50, 51. I mean, never very strong. Now the honeymoon is over and Kamala Harris is beginning to revert to where we had seen her before. And you know, what's funny, guys, with us, with our polling, when she took a hit is when she attacked Joe Biden. So on the stage, she was never well liked, but she got the trend reversed. She was grossly underwater. The moment she pulled, that little girl was me. When she did that on the stage, her number started to dive and she never recovered. And then Tulsi Gabbard, I would say, just put she just drove the stake, man. Yeah, she just said, put a fork in her. She's done. And so I don't think you can recover from first impressions like that. It's almost like you need a generational shift so that new people are looking at you.
But particularly when you have friendly media asking you questions, you know, it's compounded on that. I mean, you know, why haven't you been to the border? Well, I haven't been to Europe. I mean, and that was a softball question. You know, and if for me, when you watch that, even if you're watching, you know, MSNBC, CNN, you know, I mean, even their viewers are saying, you know, he's actually trying to be nice to you, and this is your reaction. I mean, I just find it just really remarkable.
Yeah, I think you're on to something too, though. There's something clearly going on. I mean, we do know that, you know, the Team Obama never really liked Team Biden. And that is true of their 8 years in the presidency. They kind of loathe interfering to get into the race. But we've never seen anything like what happened in 2020 with the Democratic nomination. That was a selection. So voters all over the country, from California to Virginia, on the Democratic side, were telling us, you know what, we agree with Bernie. Our heart is with Bernie. But everyone is telling us he can't win. And the media and Obama did the work behind the scenes to push out all the other candidates. And the media did their role, which was to convince the Democratic voter that Bernie Sanders could not win the election. But they never liked Joe Biden. They never wanted Joe Biden. I've never seen anything like that all of these years. Nobody has. He was basically selected. I mean, for lack of a better word. And Hillary was, you know, whatever word we've heard people say with that, coronated. But this was different. You know, I mean, we didn't have an incumbent president get on the phone and do whatever he had to do, from, you know, threats to charms. You know, you will get out of this race. I will make sure Joe gives you a job at HHS. I will make sure that Joe gives you a job. You know, come on, we're selling tickets here. What do you want? Get out of the race. It was bad. It was very backdoor, you know, kind of dark smoke-filled room kind of stuff. Certainly not what you would think the Democratic voter would want. And there was like a certain sadness to their choice. I guess I have to vote for Joe Biden. We've never seen a candidate get killed in the first 4 primary caucus states and then go on to win the nomination, folks. That doesn't happen. So historic firsts of that nature never happen, and they never happen for a reason. Something dramatically different happened this time.
Okay, so now let's move on to November, in a very peculiar vote. Now, do you have any theory about what happened in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia. I mean, there are now audits in Arizona. I mean, there's could be an audits in Georgia and Pennsylvania. Do you have a kind of some overall theory about what had happened on that night?
Yeah, do you mean what happened leading up to it? And then
no, not leading up to it, but the
yeah.
actual vote. How how did that happen? Because I mean, we talked about this election, and there was so much about this that never made sense. To put it bluntly, we've just been talking about Biden. How did he get 81 million of votes?
Yes.
How was it that Trump was able to win in Ohio and Florida and Iowa?
The answer is they printed 81 million ballots.
But
I mean, guys, in the 6 states, where they held back large chunks of the vote by mail, the election day margin did not hold. In the rest of the states where they did not, the election day margin held. That's really the trend that everybody really should look at. The bottom line is, and in places like North Carolina where it barely held, they dumped that vote by mail. We all knew what it was. There were no surprises. They did attempt to go back and count votes that they had already agreed would not be counted. So it wasn't the Wild West. In the 6 states where it was the Wild West, we saw things we have never seen before. And I have to say this, there are 3 things everyone needs to keep in mind about the changes that did take place, because I get this question a lot. Well, could it really have been that significant? And my answer is, it was easy. We made it easy to make it that significant. And the reason is, 1, the voter rolls are not clean. They're very dirty. And the concept of sending out unsolicited ballot requests and ballots is an inherent breach of what was like a built-in primer against not just fraud, but mistakes, which is that if you don't request an absentee ballot yourself, then all of those dirty records, we call them dirty records, their votes aren't going to be out there anyway. So only real people are going to request their real vote, which helped. It was kind of like a built-in protection. And what Democrats wanted to do was expand that pool of potential ballots, unsolicited or solicited, that were out there. And then the second thing they wanted to do was weaken or remove the verification procedures, because what good is this expanded pool if people are verifying them and throwing them out? And then the third thing is, what good are they out there? And if they're going to be counted, if you don't have a way to bring them back. And that's where the ballot harvest and the drop boxes and the other issues that really caused a lot of chain of custody issues came into play. So we spent 60 days, saying this was going to happen. Not only is it possible, it's likely. It's back to the basics of human nature. We wouldn't need laws if men were angels, right? If you leave a system vulnerable to exploitation, people are going to exploit it. I wish that wasn't true about human nature, but it is. And, for those other so-called experts out there who are on Twitter today talking about who's funding the big lie, which is a joke, I would ask them which record exactly that people like myself and Matt Brainerd, which record are you disputing? Because we're not giving little scientific models and, statistical analysis on a line chart or a pie chart. We're giving you records of people who are in the National Change of Address database, who are on the voter file as a change of address flag. They no longer live in state A, yet voted in state, from state B. They're not eligible. Which record are you disputing? Because this is not theoretical. So, and I'm just, looking at people like Larry Sabato today from Crystal Ball. He hasn't called an election correctly in like 10 years. All right. I don't know. So anyone could have called 08 correctly. We can't even count that because my 9-year-old daughter could have called that correctly. I mean, Barack Obama was going to win that election. Which record are you disputing? These are guys who have been around for a long time, gentlemen. They know that what happened in November was not normal. I mean, it isn't something they've witnessed their entire life. It's not how the United States conducts its elections in any state. You can't put that much shock on a system in 60 days and expect it to perform correctly. Government never does anything that efficiently. And the officials that we spoke to before the election, where, one Wisconsin official told us, just trying to keep their heads above water. They were it was basically like flood the zone, the concept of the strategy of overwhelming people. And that's what happened to these poor people, even those who were just trying to do their job correctly. And I just don't know how you could expect to open up a system that much to exploitation or I don't know how you could do that and not expect it to be exploited. We did, and of course it was.
Yeah, but
I don't know how else to put it.
But what you're saying here is interesting from your profession as being a pollster. I mean, how do you add those variables in? Is it even
you don't? You don't. You try to do the best job you can. You brought up Robert from Trafalgar. I did see an interview with him right before the election, and our Pennsylvania polling was showing a very, very close race. And in the end, actually, the president took about 2 out of 3 undecideds, which put him into a small lead in our poll, 0.8 or something. But we do that. We actually release the results in the tens of percentage points, and we do that for a reason. But it was funny, and he had said, you better just add 2 points to that for Joe Biden, because they got that down to an art form in Philadelphia. Now, everybody knew that was true, and I'm sure some people, maybe, I can't speak for everybody, maybe they do that, guys, but we don't. We just try to do the best job we can. And I think it's sad now that you had so many of those people, and I just mentioned one, by the way. He is in no rush to tell you the truth about what happened in November 2020, because he was so wrong. And he has no incentive to tell you he was even more wrong than you think he was, right? He thought, Texas was going to be close. Florida was blue. I mean, guys, we can go down the line. North Carolina was blue. Ohio was dead even though Trump won it by 10 points. Iowa was dead even. Why? Because they were pushing Quinnipiac, Ohio, Biden +4. New York Times, Ohio, Biden +5. Iowa, Biden +1, Quinnipiac and the New York Times. They got killed in these states. So people like Larry Sabato are now out smearing people because they're in no rush to say, I was even more wrong than you think I was, right? Not only was this not going to be a landslide, maybe, just maybe, those states are in question. And that is, I think, a fair way to put it. I've had some other people make me come to my senses on this. We don't know for sure who benefited. I'm just saying, let's,
did
give
Nate
them that
Silver,
at least.
Did Nate Silver and Nate Cohn, how wrong were they in November?
Terribly wrong. Texas was blue on Nate Silver's map. Texas was going for Joe Biden. Florida, which I had polled, and it's a sticky point. He hates me. Yet I know this stuff gets to him, and then he tweets out cute little things. I told people about Florida going back for years, some of the problems. They chose not to listen. In 2018, the Nate Cohens of the world, I had Gillum winning by 6. I even tried to show him, personally, why he was wrong in Florida. Not only did they not take it seriously, they mocked me publicly, and moving on, we're going to be right this year, Biden +5 or whatever. And Florida truth is, it was 2-3 points sounds close in Florida, but when you've been polling it for as long as I have, when you come up with a Trump +3 and it's a solid +3 among these demographics, certain demographics, it's not close. So when Donald Trump is polling in the mid-40s in Miami-Dade, it's not close. Joe Biden has no chance. That state is over. Move on. Ohio, when they were releasing their Biden +5s, we did a live show where I had just polled Ohio over the last 2 days. The raw, which means I hadn't even started to weight it yet, was overwhelmingly Donald Trump. And that would have moved it more in favor of Biden. I showed people live how I had to manipulate the data to get Biden within 6 points, 4 points. I showed them different ways to do it in Ohio. These were states that were not close. And Nate, on election night, on election day, I said, look at, we already know what the early vote is, which was incorrectly interpreted again. We already know what the early vote looks like as far as who voted and who didn't. And I'm looking at the turnout by precinct in Florida. This state is over. Turn the page. It's over. Trump is going to win. He's going to win it easily. Well, he put out a little tweet because of some of the things we were talking about. Now I'm going to go walk my dog because I'm not going to entertain this large Republican surge in Florida. That's what he put. So that's my little middle finger emoji on election night that I had pinned there for a long time, because this is, and then they pretend that they were right, like because they favored Biden. You weren't right. You got at least four large major states incorrect, which is the reason why they're so important. It tells you whether or not this really was a competitive race, or was this going to be a landslide for Joe Biden. I mean, if you have Texas blue, this is a landslide of historic proportions. It's going to be the most embarrassing defeat since Jimmy Carter was thrown out of office. And that is not, nor was it ever, the reality of the race. It was very close, and they needed those mail-in votes at the end to get him over. It's that simple. No president has ever been reelected with that many more votes, guys, and then lost. I mean, no president has ever lost reelection by increasing their vote share ever, let alone that significantly. It just doesn't happen.
In kind of winding down here, I mean, how would you, I don't want you to give the secret sauce as you said it here, but I'd be very curious, would it be difficult to ask a question to potential voters? Do you have buyer's remorse?
We're doing that now. So that's going to be in the next public polling project, because we did do you remember when the Colonial Pipeline was shut down? Right. I was thinking in North Carolina, I wonder how badly Joe Biden would lose that race. Now, since he did lose North Carolina, but would it be really, is there remorse here now? The anger in North Carolina was through the roof. It was undercovered by the media. And we did do something that wasn't released publicly because it was for somebody. And since then, I decided for the public polling project, I want to do something that's credible and does ask about voters' remorse. And there's really two ways we can do this. One is the very traditional, if you could do it again, who would you vote for? And then give them just like you would ask before 2020. And then there is the other way, which I think we may go that way, which is perhaps ask them just like we normally would, and then follow it up with those voters who chose, Donald Trump, and ask them, who did you vote for before? I mean, there's got to be a credible way to do it. We don't want to just flatly say, right. Do you regret voting for Joe Biden? And we do know, because we have been asking about vote history. The problem is I don't put a lot of stock. And I think, speaking of Nate at the New York Times, I think you learn your lesson, Nate. You don't put stock in what people tell you when you ask them about prior voting. So that has been, there's a wealth of literature on this. People lie. So when you ask them, who did you vote for in 2020? There is going to be some people who will not tell you the truth. And so it's very difficult to use that, and apply it to any other question.
It's really funny. George and I did it. I think maybe it was a week ago or so, 2 weeks ago, we did a Zoom interview with one of our followers. And you remember George, and she was talking about, we were talking about the 2020 election, and she did this, and I voted for Trump. I mean, as if,
and you'll get that.
But she still had to whisper it to us, and I haven't told my family.
And you'll get that. It's not just, see, that's the difficulty and why we're trying to tailor this a little bit differently, because those people absolutely exist. It's not just the Biden voter who is going to be, looking at his performance and saying, I regret it. I don't want to say it. So I'm going to lie, and I'm going to say I voted for Trump anyway. You'll get that side of the coin. And then you'll get the other side, which is typically what we see with social biases now. People are afraid to talk about their support for Donald Trump. And what I was bringing up before, just to give you guys a last little piece of data, we're now at a point where more than 4 in 10 voters tell us they're at least somewhat uncomfortable with being honest to a pollster during an interview. That we ask them, somewhat and very uncomfortable. I mean, that's a statistician's worst nightmare. I mean, 4 in 10 are basically admitting that they may not be honest with you, that's a nightmare. So that, just to give people, the audience, an idea of the breadth of the challenge here. I mean, it's really difficult.
But Richard, I mean, just looking forward, and I know it's early days, do you have any sense of next year's midterms, how that might shape up? I mean, Republicans and Fox News, they're all expecting, oh, it's going to be 1994 again, 2010 again, Republican blowout. I mean, are you getting any sense of how it might go? Or is it
history? History certainly does tell us that is what we're headed for. However, I say this with a caveat. I mean, history does tell us this, just like it told us that it would happen to Republicans in 18, or at least in the House. That was a relatively weak victory for Democrats in the House. Republicans actually did the best in the Senate since JFK. One more Senate seat, you would have had to go back to FDR for a president's party to buck the trend like that. So I would tell voters, don't listen to Fox News. They don't honestly, if anyone can snatch defeat out of the hands of victory, it's the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is going through this identity crisis right now. And I think it's very clear from the results. Forget about the polling and the exit polling and the post-election autopsies. We have real votes in real precincts and real districts and real counties in real states. If Republicans try to go back to business as usual, they will get destroyed. And their time as a national force is over, because the suburban trend that they're hoping to arrest is not going to arrest. The suburbs don't look the way they did for Mitt Romney now. The suburbs don't look the way they did for John McCain right now. There is only one way for the Republican Party to move forward, and that is by adopting Trump's message for a racially diverse group of people. And that's it. You're always going to have some privileged who champion the working class. It is very, very rare to see the working class champion anybody of privilege. So where I'm going at is that those grievances are real, and they're widening out. Where would you rather be? The party of working Hispanics or the party of the political class? It may not look good on paper now, but the trend tells us there's only one way. There's only one place to go.
So just
it's staring them in the face. It's staring them in the face, and they can't. Yeah.
Suburban. So you're saying the suburban, that kind of the suburban vote that had once been for the Republicans, that's gone. That's gone to the Democrats now.
Yeah, I think you can tighten it, but the problem is, and we do this a lot on Inside the Numbers, some of these Atlanta metro areas, a lot of these other metro suburbs like Philadelphia, they're actually shrinking. They're not growing at all. So, I don't know why you would, compete for a shrinking vote. The areas that Republicans once won outside of Georgia 5, Georgia 7, perfect example, they don't look the same that they used to. And what I mean by that is, we have, there's no other way to put this. We have three words: immigration, migration, and education. The people who once voted Republican in these areas have left. The people who are coming, international immigration, they no longer favor Republicans the way they used to in the 90s. This is just a reality. And then education. So Republicans once relied on an overwhelming white suburban vote to carry those areas. You can't do that anymore, because even the white vote now is shifting in those areas, not everywhere, but in those areas, to a more professional class vote. Now, Democrats could overreach, and I think we saw that in Obama's era. I think the suburban vote for Republicans in midterms distorted this trend, but this trend has been it's been in the works for 30, 40 years. We can see it if you look at a longer period of time. I think Republicans looked at their performance in 2010, 2014, and it tricked them a little bit, into thinking that those areas, are their areas still. They swing. Those are swingy voters. If Democrats go too much to the left, I could foresee, a district like the one I just mentioned in Georgia swinging back. Right now, though, the long-term trend is in the Democrats' favor. So Republicans need to expand their coalition. And Trump pointed the way. It's just you need somebody maybe a little less pompous and callous. And his personality wasn't for everyone, but his message was. That's my point. And it's when you poll it, it's not even close. It's not even close. He had the most popular agenda we've polled in a generation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to define American populism because the Republican Party gets in the way all the time.
They
But
do.
I think, but you're right. The message is there, and the core message is there, and it really these Republican, the Kevin McCarthy's and these people like this. I mean, what they do, they're the biggest hindrance to that message. Okay, they mouth the words, but they never do anything about it. And I think that's, we haven't even talked about, maybe we could talk about another time, that strange political animal known as the independent, which I think is really very, very important moving forward as well. Because I think in many ways, it's the Republican Party, if they can get their act together and decapitate their leadership and send them packing. I mean, there's a really great opportunity because there's so many people that don't identify with this party. I mean, the Democrats are a known tribe. Okay, and I think that keeps a lot of independents, kind of skittish. Okay, but I think that there's a huge opening for a populist conservative message. And forget the GOP, but the message itself. And I think that that's the great opportunity ahead. And demographics is destiny is garbage if you have it's garbage if you have the right message.
Without a doubt. And I gotta, people look at the exit polls and go back and try to make these arguments. But I say again, we now have real votes. You cannot win Zapata County, Texas, if you did not do what was otherwise thought to be impossible for a Republican among that group of minorities. You cannot win 45% of the vote or more in Miami-Dade. It's more than just the Cuban vote at that point, folks. All right, we're beyond that. Pinellas County was as close as it was because of turned Puerto Rican support. This is like you said, the demographics is destiny is garbage when you when you flip the table, when you completely just upend it, throughout the rule book. And when we poll, it is hard to poll. It's like, how do you define this thing, this America First thing? And what we did was just policy by policy. And that, if you, not just immigration, all of the other things that really defined what Donald Trump spoke about, but from healthcare on down, it really is amazing the disconnect between what we hear in the media and what people really believe. And when you don't attribute it to either party, then you'll get a more accurate answer on where people stand. The problem or the challenge that Republicans have is that you cannot have a message when you yourself, you're not in agreement about what you stand for. And I think we have to face it when it comes to the leadership. They don't agree and never did with what Donald Trump was trying to do. They may have claimed they did for years. George Bush claimed to be the interventionist candidate in 2000. How did that work out? They claim to be pro-family, but they never actually do anything about it. They claim to be pro-worker, and they never actually back them. There's no way to convince people that you are what you want them to think you are unless you actually act that way. And there's 3 to 4%, I would say, who would really feel bad if you cut Kevin McCarthy loose, guys. If you told Mitch McConnell it's time to go, you don't really have a place here anymore. I'm saying that if you did cut those people loose, it would be a net positive, because the new people that you would bring in would swamp the percentage of people that you would lose who would be mad that there's a break in the party like this. It's in fact, it's not even close.
Nobody will cry over that. No one. Okay.
Nope, that's what I mean.
That's a problem.
So you'll lose David French.
Yeah, you got these Republican senators and McCarthy and so on. They just basically sit on their hands and they think, hey, well, it's all cyclical. We're gonna be in 2 years' time, in 4 years' time, and that's the way it goes. They don't have any ability to win a national election. And to win a national election, you really do need a national message. Otherwise, all you're going to do is, maybe in 4 years' time, they'll recapture this, and then they'll be back in power. But so what? I mean, what difference does it make if you get Kevin McCarthy is now Speaker of the House? It's not going to make any difference.
And I think, that's a great point. I mean, somebody asked me the other day, about we had Joe Kent on the show in Washington 3. And somebody said, it's always a tough district. Could he win Washington 3? And my response was to the viewer, what's the difference between Butler and a Democrat? Point it to me. What is the difference? She voted for the commission. She voted for impeachment. I mean, what else? I mean, she's not going to stand up against critical race theory. What's important to you as somebody who, if you're attracted to a candidate like Joe Kent, then I assume you'd want your congressman against critical race theory. You're against forever wars. You don't want to see the defense budget blown up any more than the Social Security and Medicare budget, right? So then what is the difference? I ask you, I mean, really, tax cuts, maybe? Tax cuts, right? Where does that leave us?
And number 3, Dr. Seuss, okay?
Right. Oh, God. There, I mean, exactly. And that's the thing. Why it is important to, as you said, it, decapitate the leadership and replace them. They are the faces of this party day in and day out. They're the ones who go to the microphones after Nancy Pelosi, after Chuck Schumer, and you can't convince people that you're not them. They're your leaders, right? So they never stand up. These are the guys who never stand up to defend them against the things that really matter to them. And somebody very on the complete opposite side of the spectrum would be like a Governor Ron DeSantis, who seems every time to be ahead, not reacting to the media, not reacting to what Democrats are doing, but being proactive on issues he knows have overwhelming support, and that the Democrat, he's trying to, compare and contrast. Maybe the media doesn't tell you a good job of where the boundaries are here between the parties. So let me show you. And that's really the only way to do it, especially when you have what we call the media handicap. It's not even a bias anymore. They are handicapping the game in favor of Democrats. That's their job. It's their role. They're actively doing that. So you can't play defense like Kevin McCarthy does, like Mitch McConnell does. Can't go along to get along.
The good thing is this media handicap, we know about it. Okay. That's our advantage. We know about it.
Right.
Yeah, now. Right. That's right.
All right, Richard, thank you so much. I mean, that was a fascinating.
This was absolutely fascinating.
Really,
wow.
Really interesting. I mean, I learned so much. That was, it was a wonderful discussion, and I hope you'll join us again very soon, because I do hope we'll make this a kind of a permanent forum for exchanging ideas, and because this was really interesting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I loved being here, guys. This was great. I mean, it was a fascinating discussion and questions, and the reciprocity is the name of the game. We should have you guys on our show too. We'd love it.
Yeah.
We really would.
We'd love to do it. We'd love to do it. Yeah.
Richard, you humbled us both. Yeah. That's a rare event. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you, and
well, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Richard.
All right. Thank you.
All the best, guys.
All the best.
Bye.